Good evening. The government has long had a penchant for parachuting so-called superheads into troubled schools. The narrative goes like this. Head teacher arrives, kicks ass, kicks out all the bad eggs, the pupils and the teachers, results soar, head gets supersonic salary and a gong, moves on to next badly performing school and so on. But Newsnight can exclusively reveal new evidence that demonstrates that this strategy is not working. Chris Cook is here. Chris, what's the fundamental problem with the way our schools are run then?
That's absolutely right. This new research, which is coming out in the Harvard Business Review tonight, a peer-reviewed publication, has looked at 411 English head teachers, and what it fundamentally finds is that we basically pay almost twice as much to the most short-termist, destructive head teachers who just look like they're doing a good job, while there is a huge category of teachers who do brilliant jobs, who basically never get knighthoods, and who get paid much, much less. This is phenomenal research. It's based on data from inside schools that we've just never had a look at. This could be some of the most important research for social policy in recent years.
We spend a lot of time and energy trying to improve schools in England. But a new piece of research, published tonight in the Harvard Business Review and shared exclusively with Newsnight, is potentially a breakthrough. It reveals we're getting some very big things wrong when it comes to what makes a good head teacher.
This new research throws up into question whether we are hiring the right people to be our head teachers and whether we're rewarding the right people to be our head teachers. It looks at things from a very different angle, and it may mean that we have to go back to step one in terms of who's running our schools.
This new research uses a unique data source to work out what works. Administrative data from a big group of sample secondary academies, which analysts at the Centre for High Performance have used to look at what head teachers actually do.
We looked at 411 heads and looked at the actions that they actually take within their management information systems, how they manage staff, how they manage teachers, how they manage students, what they pay teachers, how they manage behaviour, how they recruit people, how they exclude people. And what we found is that they fall into 5 main categories.
There are 3 of those groups that are particularly interesting. First of all, a group that they dub the surgeons. These are head teachers who act decisively, and they cut out both staff and pupils at schools as they turn them around. Second, a group they call the philosophers. These are head teachers who think of themselves as just experienced teachers, not really leaders or managers. They talk a lot about pedagogy in particular. And third, a group that they call the architects. These are slow-moving, meticulous planners who like to do things in sequence.
These strategies are very different. Surgeons dropped into a school would be expected to expel an average of 28% of that year's final year students to dramatically boost that year's GCSE results. The philosophers would expel around 6% of their final year students, the architects just 1%. Surgeons also cut staff by at least 8%. The philosophers don't really change anything here, and while the architects manage out poorly performing staff, they recruit replacements, so they end up with a bigger staff firm.
Surgeons are very decisive. They make quick actions. Sometimes those actions are controversial. They cut large numbers of students. They also get rid of underperforming staff. But in the short term, they are able to increase examination results very quickly.
You can see that in this graph, which shows the annual average change in exam results whilst each sort of head is in post. The surgeon schools certainly do much better than the philosophers and the architects at getting results up. They massively increase the proportion of children who leave with 5 good GCSEs.
So are surgeons good in the long term?
Surgeons are not good in the longer term because they're short-termist. They aggressively focus on students about to take their examinations and expel those they think will not pass. School leaders that take more time and focus on working with the community are able to build sustainable schools.
So here's the same chart you saw before, but let's roll it on and look at the year after those heads leave. The architect schools you'll see are stable, but surgeon schools' results collapse. They drop at 2 years too. It's only at 3 years that surgeon schools stabilise. So the architects now look the best. But remember, the surgeons shrunk the size of the school by hoofing out tougher kids. So 3 years after a surgeon leaves a school, they would average only between 50 and 90 children graduating with 5 or more good GCSEs each year. But the architects would leave a school where, on average, 160 to 170 children each year would get 5 good GCSEs. The raw social good of an architect is way bigger.
The architects focus on building the right school for the future, the right school for its community. So they start off by improving the environment in the school, improving behaviour of the students, improving the leadership, and then improve the teaching. They also engage with the local community and try and understand what is the right school. I mean, for example, they see parental complaints as a positive thing because they believe parents are now engaged with the school, which is the right thing for the school going forwards.
You'd hope then that our school system was systematically identifying and rewarding those architect head teachers. But it isn't. If you look at who the government gives knighthoods, MBEs, those sorts of honours to, 63% of the surgeon head teachers in our sample had a gong of some kind. For the architects, it was just 13%. And if you have a look at who governing bodies are willing to pay the most, you see the same pattern. The average surgeon was earning £154,000 a year on average, as opposed to £86,000 a year for the architects, even though they run much bigger schools.
Generally, when governing boards are looking how to reward their head teachers, they will only look at 1 year's performance, 1 year's data. And indeed, the system as a whole is geared around 1 or 2 years in terms of Ofsted comes and visits very frequently in underperforming schools. League tables are published every year. So without a doubt, head teachers will very much feel that they are on an annual cycle of being monitored. So I think we could really do with a sea change where all of us think much more about what we need to do to improve schools in the medium term.
If that weren't enough, there's another fascinating finding too. Of the surgeon head teachers, 71% were PE teachers. Of the philosophers, 78% were English teachers. And of the architects, 68% were either history or economics teachers.
Our most surprising finding was the clear link between the subjects they studied and taught and how they then behaved as leaders of schools. We believe that this clear link comes because they haven't had leadership training or exposure to other ways of thinking, so they fall back on the values and beliefs within the subjects that they've studied and taught over the years. For example, PE teachers believe there are winners and losers and you're only as strong as your weakest link. So you can see how they believe in excluding the poor performing students.
This research suggests the existing school system is misfiring. We're not rewarding heads who make the biggest impact for the biggest number over the longest period. We're simply rewarding those heads who are best at playing the game.
Chris Cook, well, joining me now is Sir Michael Wilshaw, who is the Chief Inspector of Schools in England and indeed a former history teacher himself. Good evening to you. It's terrifying, isn't it, that some of the best heads in the country are being paid the least?
Well, I'm really glad this research has come out, actually, because it confirms things that I've believed in for a long time. There are lots of people who go unrecognised, who do a fantastic job leading their schools, getting good results in the long term, and yet go unrecognised and unrewarded. And we've got too many people in the system who are into self-aggrandizement, empire building, receiving massive salaries, and who are not building for the future. A great head is not only somebody who improves results for all children, but also ensures that there's a future for the school and get staff in who can replicate the success that they've achieved.
But some of this, the short-term stuff, is absolutely desperate because you know, the quick hit, the short terms, the exclusion of that year of GCS pupils in these so-called quick turnaround schools is 28%, but in some schools it's 50%. Well, of course, you can get any result you want.
Yeah.
The more kids you exclude that are not necessarily going to get the top grades.
Well, if we found that, if inspectors found that, we would do something about it and heavily criticise the
But
schools.
it's interesting
And in
why
fact,
it hasn't been found then.
well, you know, we do criticise schools who have high exclusion rates. We just produced a report a few months ago on the underperformance of children between the ages of 11 and 14, key stage 3. We called it the wasted years because head teachers in secondary schools were focusing on key stage 4 years 10 and 11, and particularly year 11, focusing on that last year group to the exclusion of focusing on those youngsters between 11 and 14. And as a result, although their outcomes look good on the surface, they should have been a lot better.
But you are Chief Inspector and you're also head of Ofsted. You think that this has been a flawed system. Do you think you should have done more? Or has Ofsted been far too short-termist about this?
No, we're not. And I sign letters every week, and if you talk to head teachers who receive these letters, they will say that they are pleased to receive them. These are head teachers in schools that are not good, they're underperforming, but inspectors see that the leaders putting into place the building blocks for improvement and the strategies for long-term growth. And I send those letters out to say, the school's not good yet, the results are not good, but you're a good leader and you've got in place those systems which will eventually improve the school.
So why is it then that these short-term heads, the so-called surgeons, the quick fix guys and gals that get out fast, are able to pay themselves sometimes double the slow burn heads?
Yeah, exactly, and we need to blame the governors for that. And governors should look at, first of all, the head teachers prepared to commit themselves to the school and to the community. I get worried about head teachers who get the gongs, get the big salaries, and then go off somewhere else for a bigger salary. You know, I, as a head, spent a long time in schools to make sure that school worked and that the community was proud of that institution. We need heads who are going to commit themselves for the long term.
Yeah,
and
that should be the contract.
And if they don't do that, then the governor should do something about it. And they certainly shouldn't be rewarded by government.
Let's move on now to more broadly talking about education in this government. Describe the impact that you think that Theresa May's plans for grammar schools will have.
Well, I've been quite open about this. I think it's a retrograde step. I came into teaching to improve the lot of all children, not just some. I think if we go down the route of grammar schools, yes, the 15 to 20% will do well, but the rest will do bad. And all you have to do is look at areas with grammar schools. All you have to do is to look at Kent. All you have to do is to look at Buckingham and at Sutton and see the gap between the attainment gap between those who go to the grammar schools and those who don't. And we know, as somebody who always worried about recruitment, because schools improve when you've got good teachers, the best teachers will gravitate to the places where it's easiest to teach. And all you have to do is to talk to head teachers of secondary moderns in Kent, and they will say how impossible it is to get good staff.
But do you think poor kids get a better deal now than they did, say, in the 60s?
They do. More poor youngsters are going to university than ever before. If you look at London schools, they're doing fantastically well serving the most deprived communities. I can take you to academies in Portsmouth and in Birmingham and elsewhere where you've got great heads, architect heads actually, who are doing very well by their children. The big challenge for our school system is to make sure we've got enough teachers and enough leaders of our schools to improve them. It's not about more structural change. We've had enough of that.
Now, if you look back at the tenure, for example, of Michael Gove and Nicky Morgan, how would you rate that? I mean, you were there through those years.
I was, and I had a lot of admiration, and again, I've been quite public about that. I had a lot of admiration for Michael Gove. He analyses what needed to be done very well. He felt, as I felt and many other people felt, that we needed to give more autonomy to head teachers to make the difference. That's happened. We needed more diversity in the system, academies and free schools. He realised that the curriculum wasn't as good as it should be, nor the examination system, and he reformed those things. And I think we're seeing the benefits now.
You leave on the 31st of December. If you could put your hand on your heart and say there's one thing that you wish that you'd pushed harder on, what would it be?
Well, I wished I'd pushed harder on focusing on what really matters for those youngsters who are not going to go to university, who are not going to go to those youngsters who need skills, who need to go to an apprenticeship. I wish I'd focused on that much more than I have, and that's the big challenge for the country, as well as ensuring we've got good teachers and good leaders.
So Michael Wishaw, thank you very much indeed.